Today, I wanted to go over the best Year 9 Season 3 tier list. Now, this is only for ranked. Let's go over how I have this laid out. D is operators that are just awful, that you should never pick. C are operators that need a buff / underpowered, or they're just super situational, and it's more dependent on how your team is pushing. B is balance / site dependent. These operators are way more useful in certain scenarios. They're way different than C though, because C is more based on pushes with the team, and B is more site dependent. For example, some maps you might ban a trick, and C is more like operators like Sense, where you might have a specific take with your team. A is operators you can pick almost every single round and be impactful. And then S brings you the most value. This is what I think is the best picks for ranked if you want to rank up on console and PC. Now, just for reference, last season I was champ, literally from solo queuing on a recruit account on PlayStation, and on Xbox I was champ on there as well. And this season on PC I was top 8 champion in the world. So I feel like my opinion is valid, but at the same time you have to keep in mind that this is my opinion. So if you disagree, agree, let me know down in the comments, and let's get into it. Starting in D, we have trolling. You should never pick these operators. I only have 2 operators, which being Cav and Rook. Now, I'm gonna see a lot of people trying to make cases for Rook and Cav, but these 2 operators, compared to other operators in general on defense, are just so bad. Rook doesn't really bring much value in higher ranks, and to be honest, a lot of people have this mindset where Rook is good because you get extra HP, or it can help you if you get downed and you can self-revive. But the reality is, the higher you get in rank, the less you're going to get downed and the more headshots you're gonna see. So you can't really crutch that idea that Rook can save you, and to be honest, that extra HP never really helps. Because let's say I get down to 1 HP with Rook, I much rather have someone like, let's say, Doc, that can bring me back all the way up to 100 HP. And then on the flip side, you have an operator like Cav, who is only useful in the most minor rounds. Usually what happens with Cav is they try to get an interrogation, and they end up just getting refragged right away and there's no interrogation. Or she's meant to just waste time, which in all reality, high IQ players from gold and up, they will realize they don't need to try to track down Cav. Cav has lost her appeal over the years because they're just better roaming operators, and I can even name some 3 armor operators which honestly would be better than Cav in terms of utility, guns, all of that. Cav is just a low-end operator, and sure, you can make any operator work in Siege, but that doesn't make them good just because you're good with them. So personally, if we're talking about in a team ranked environment, Cav, Rook, awful picks. So let's head on over to C with Thunderbird. Thunderbird is a very underwhelming operator. Personally, I did like her before they changed her gadget up, but she does have a very interesting kit, having a deployable shield, and just overall her weapons are pretty fun to use, even though the spear can be kind of underwhelming without an ACOG. But her healing stations are really the main reason why a lot of people will pick her. And honestly, when comparing an operator like Doc to Thunderbird, it's night and day, because Doc is just way better. Thunderbird has the appeal of having a passive healer, basically, where even if Thunderbird dies, you still have healing capability. But the issue is, she doesn't give you enough healing, so there's not enough risk compared to the reward. Because what happens a lot of times is Thunderbird will end up giving you more information for the attackers of where you're positioned just based off the healing stations. I have seen situations where people have been revived based off her Thunderbirds, but once again, Doc is just way more useful. Thunderbirds are also very easy to get rid of, or they work on the opposition. For example, attackers, when they're taking sight, it just gives them healing, and honestly, that can screw you over more than it can help. So Thunderbird is just very underwhelming, and I would not suggest picking her in ranked. Next, we have Chachanka. Now, I was super excited with the rework with Chachanka, which turned out to be very underwhelming. Now, his primary weapon is super interesting because it's one of the only weapons that can make lines of sight super consistent and super easy, and I love that. But the main issue is his gadget overall. His gadget is too slow, it's too clunky, it takes too long to reload, and it's just not worth it. Because a lot of times what ends up happening with Tachanka is if you're sitting there in sight just shooting off those little pellets, usually the attacker, if they're smart enough, they'll realize that this guy has his gun down and you can just push him. And that happens 9 times out of 10 with Tachanka. Now, Tachanka can be situational, and that's why he's so low down here. Because there are times where technically on paper, he could be super useful. But on the flip side, I'd much rather bring Goyo, which any of my teammates can use. It takes 1 pop, and there's that anxiety factor for the attackers if they're trying to plant, knowing there's a Goyo canister right by them. So overall, Tachanka is just super underwhelming, and he needs some type of buff. They need to speed up his deployment. They need to do something, maybe make it an underbarrel instead of an entire gadget where you have to pull out this big machine launcher. Like, it would be super cool if they just made Tachanka's gadget an underbarrel, kind of like Buck. Next up, we have Sense. Now, Sense is one of the operators I wish was higher on this list, but they need some type of buff. Now, Sense works very well in post-plant scenarios or while trying to get a plant down if you have a Glass. Glass works super well with Sense because the symmetry with the smokes and just having that extra capability of having smokes. The only issue with Sense as well, besides the gadget having to roll all weird, is if there's any type of explosives, it gets rid of the smokes. Unlike smoke grenades like, let's say, Glass has, that won't get destroyed, which is super nice. So a lot of times you're just better off going maybe other operators that have smokes, like let's say Glass, let's say Montang, let's say any other operator that has smokes. So Sense is just one of those operators where there's no reward. There's just pure risk, because what tends to happen, even if you have a Glass with Sense, is people will just once again break the smokes, or they will just run through it like absolute idiots. Now, you can say this about any operator that has smoke canisters or smoke grenades is what I mean. But the issue is you can pick any operator that has this as a secondary gadget. This is Sense's primary gadget, and it is super underwhelming, man. Next up on the list, we have Alibi. Now, Alibi is just one of those ranked picks, which if Alibi had an ACOG, you would see everybody use Alibi. But the problem is the impact that Alibi has on the realm is very minimal, especially with Alibi's gadget, which doesn't really bring much value compared to other operators that we have on defense, especially the mini trap operators like Legion, Goyo, Capcan, etc. Literally this operator sucks and needs a buff. Next up, we have Oryx. Oryx is kind of on the fence in terms of situational, more or less underwhelming at the best, because Oryx doesn't really have much going for him besides his dash, and his dash is super loud. It's not really the best flank overall. Like, you can jump up hatches, but it's always super loud, and it's always obvious because every hatch is broken. So this operator just kind of sucks. But there are specific maps, like let's say Cafe, when you play top floor, it makes it super easy to set up site, breaking all the bars and all of that because the wood is super thick. But besides that, I don't really see much value in Oryx compared to the many other defenders we're going to be talking about on this list. Next up, we have Blackbeard. Now, Blackbeard is getting a buff next season, I'm pretty sure, from the roadmap, so that's good. But right now, since it's Season 3, Blackbeard is just one of those operators that can be useful in a frag scenario, but a lot of times his shield just gets you perspective, and it's super clunky and slow. And there's not a lot of value bringing Blackbeard as, you know, as a entry. It's more one of those operators where you just sit outside a window and bait the entire round, and if the baiting doesn't work, you literally provide 0 value for your team, especially with his slow rate of fire weapons. You're better off going Ash, let's be honest. You're better off going Glass. You're better off going many other operators. Next up, we have Knock. Knock, even though Knock got like this weird little rework, I still think Knock is just not a very good attacker. She's just overall underwhelming as heck in ranked. Especially the way that players are playing right now. They're kind of all over the map. A lot of players don't play cams. Like, she can be pretty useful late round, but the problem with that is the way that ranked is played. If you're trying to take map control and all of that, you can't have one of your players just sitting AFK, just waiting for the round to slowly progress, because it's just going to take you way too long, and you're not going to be super useful every time you pick this operator. This is a very situational operator at the moment, and I definitely think Nox should have been buffed to the point where you can walk through proxy alarms and any things like that, because that would be super cool. Next up, we have Capital. Capital is one of those attackers that I personally love, but don't play enough. And that kind of just goes with what I was saying about Sense. Having the primary gadget being a smoke is one of those things where I wouldn't want to go this operator if I don't have to, because there's a lot of other operators that just make it much easier to smoke out and not have to pull out an entire like bolt and shoot it. That's my only thing. The Capital bolts are super useful when used correctly, especially late rounds and trying to execute a plant. But overall, Capital just feels slow, clunky, and underwhelming a lot of times, which sucks because I love him. It's just I want to see him buffed, and I don't see him focused on enough from Ubisoft's behalf. Next up, talking about Kali. Kali is just so underwhelming, especially once we got Impact EMPs and other operators like Twitch, Brava, Flores. Like even an Ash Charge does what she does. The burden of having to use a sniper rifle is super irritating in a game like Siege, especially because of the inconsistencies with her weapon. So you're just better off bringing somebody like, let's say, Osa, which brings so much more utility and primary utility with an actual good gun with her 2 shields, for example. Next up, we have Ella. Ella is just one of the weakest trap operators in my opinion, and that's why she's all the way down here, because most of the time, like, I'm just not going to want to bring her compared to operators like Legion, Capcan, etc. She's also just so inconsistent with her primary weapon that there's almost no point in bringing her unless you have a specific shotgun strat with her, primary shotgun. Last but not least, we have Clash, and now Clash is just one of those operators that are super strong in a really coordinated team, especially if you watch Pro League and if you see Clash played, it's usually very well done. But when you see her in ranked, she is never played right, and even if she is, a lot of the times, like, you're in a 1vx scenario with Clash being last alive, so you're just better off bringing a gun, to be honest. Now let's head over to the B tier, which we start off with Scopos. Scopos is the newest operator in Siege, and this operator is very unique, but not too strong or too weak. It's perfectly balanced at the moment, in my opinion. This operator allows you to be at 2 places at once and swap in between them. Very unique gadget overall, but against a coordinated team, it's going to be a little bit harder to maneuver around with this operator. So it's very situational based on like certain sites or even your teammates. Next up is Maverick. Maverick is super good, but is very site dependent and lineup dependent. For example, if your enemies are hard bandit tricking, then Maverick could be pretty useful. Or if you're doing a split take on, let's say, Oregon and you're going for Attic, Maverick can be that hard breacher where you don't need a Thatcher or EMPs or anything like that. Or you can just make lines of sight with him. But in terms of talking about overall hard breacher, I just think I would rather bring, based on the site, somebody with secondary EMPs and, just a hard breach to open up all lines of sight. But he is perfectly balanced in my opinion at the moment. Next up, we have Thorn. Thorn is a unique trap operator because you can get some really cheeky strats down with her, but it's not a needed operator, but she's not the worst. Next up, you have Jaeger. Jaeger is probably one of the most boring picks in Siege because he's been out for so long and he doesn't have the most fun attributes anymore. But overall, he is perfectly balanced. It's just more site dependent and, what your teammates are going overall. Next up, we have Solus. Solus is one of the operators that went from like an S tier operator all the way down to B. I think the balancing was interesting, especially with 2 rounds of balancing, but they changed up her gadget quite a bit, but I still think that she can be super useful, especially when it comes to just locating utility. Like, that's never not going to be a bad thing in Siege, whether it's attack or defense. Next up is Glaz, and you guys might be surprised that Glaz is B instead of, let's say, C or D, but Glaz is actually a pretty effective operator. Glaz has very good synergy with a lot of other operators that has smokes And if you're in a team atmosphere, Glass can do some damage, especially if you're able to get the plant down, because post-plant scenario, it's going to be a nightmare facing Glass. Next up, we have Ace. Now, Ace and Thermite and Thatcher are all in B tier. The reason why I put them in B tier is because they're kind of situational on the site. I think that they are all great, and the only problem is knowing what site that you need to bring them, because not all the time you're going to need a Thatcher, because you have so many secondary EMPs, you have Brava, you have Flores, you have so many other operators that do what they do, except they might bring more of a punch. Like, for example, Flores, instead of just disabling gadgets, he destroys them. Brava, instead of disabling, hacks them. And then with Thermite and Ace, they kind of counteract one another, because on one hand, you have a more efficient, quick operator that's easy like Ace, but then Thermite, you have bigger, more lines of sight overall. So it really depends on the site. They're not super overpowered, and they're not super underwhelming. They're perfectly balanced, in my opinion. Next up is Yana, and personally, like, for me, I just find that Yana is a little bit underwhelming in a lot of cases, because her primary gadget, it does give you a lot of intel, and there is a lot of information aspect with Yana, but she doesn't counteract a lot of other operators besides a Rooney. So there's other operators that I would much prefer, especially with the amount of traps that we have in Siege at the moment, and a lot of cameras and stuff like that. So her fragging potential is definitely there, but in reality, the only thing that she has up there compared to other operators is just the amount of cloaks that she can, you know, drone out. But besides that, she doesn't have a lot of counteractive aspects to her. Next up is Jackal. Now, Jackal is right here in the balance section because of Demos. Let's be honest, in ranked, I rather bring Demos 90% of the time. Jackal is better for a random solo queue type of operator, because at least everybody can see the Jackal pings. But Demos just does his job better, because you can literally be anywhere in the map as long as you scan the enemy. You can locate them and then take that one. And any good Siege player is going to call out exactly where they see this enemy, right? Next up is IQ. Now, the reason why IQ is up here, even though she has so much information, it's like she is so freaking boring to play. And it's just a long process of just having your scanner out, Z-pinging stuff, communicating. And for ranked, let's be honest, this tier list isn't only for 5 stacks, it's also for solo queuers. A lot of the times, even when you locate specific gadgets, it's really hard to get down below to destroy some of them because of roamers, people flanking, lines of sight, stuff like that. So IQ has a lot of good synergy with other operators, but she's not overpowered and she's not super powerful. Next up, we have Bandit. Bandit is just on this part of the list because he's super site dependent. Some sites, Cade is 9 times out of 10 going to be better, but Bandit can bandit trick, and more efficiently than Cade tricking. So this is one of those things that's super useful, but the problem is you have so many operators that counteract Bandit, so it can be super difficult sometimes to even bandit trick and not even worth it. Next is Amaru. Amaru's on here because there's a lot of good rush plans, or, you know, just taking map control super early is always a good thing. So Amaru is just balanced in my opinion. It's not a bad operator, but she's not super good. Next up is Mozzie, and Mozzie is on this list because of drone boosting. This part of the list is just perfectly balanced. Before, I would have probably put him underwhelming, needs some type of buff, but with drone boosting, you can get a lot done with Mozzie. Because a lot of people, when they use drones from Mozzie, they usually just use it to deny the area of drones, but even when they get the drones, they don't drone out. But now you're actually able to drone outside and get your drone back into the map and still be super effective. Next up is Twitch. Twitch is perfectly balanced at the moment. A lot of people will think the F2 is very underwhelming, but I think that she's perfect the way she is at the moment, because there still is place for Twitch in my eyes. Even though operators have secondary EMPs, we have Brava, Flores, so much more. The thing that makes Twitch so strong is being able to counteract Mirror, but this is also just site dependent because it just depends on what map you're playing, and a lot of times Mirror is banned. Next up is Tubaru, and Tubaru is a good operator. it's just, I feel like he's very site dependent, because on one hand, if you're bringing Bandit and Tubaru, or Cade and Tubaru, you're missing out on something on the defensive end on most maps, whether that's traps or cams, barbed wire. Like, Tubaru is going to be taking some type of primary gadget as well away from the team, which most of the time it's going to be better off that you bring like an Aruni or a Malusi or some type of cams, like I said. So it's just very site dependent in my opinion. Next we have Castle. Castle is honestly one of my favorite operators. He is everything you need in an operator on defense. He has line of sight capability, denial for windows, door frames, and you even have proxy alarms, so you have some type of intel. Now, the problem is Castle is very strat dependent, so if you're playing with people that want to play the map differently, then you guys all need to be on the same page, and that's why he's so, perfectly balanced, but also site dependent. Next up is Finir. Finir got a pretty big nerf with his gadget being able to be shot even when it's closed. So just for that aspect, I do think he is rightfully balanced. It does suck because he is a shell of his former self, but he's still pretty decent overall in ranked. Next up is Sledge, and I think Sledge is perfectly balanced at the moment. Because if you need someone that can destroy castles or utility, Sledge is there. But if you need somebody that can play vertical from below, you have Buck. And if you need somebody that can make quick vertical play without having enemies flank you and you need to start at the floor to get stuff open, you have Ram. So everybody has their own job, but I think Sledge is the very last operator I would pick to do vertical play. Next up is Nomad. Nomad is perfectly balanced because for me, I don't like using her as a flank watch majority of the time. I rather bring somebody like that has a claymore, or that can get on it, or somebody that can just get on one of my cams if they die to watch the flank. Especially because when someone gets air jabbed, they usually just run away, and then there's no flank watch anymore. So having a drone on flank is usually more important in my opinion, because I can actually act off the information and have the one up. Sophia is perfectly balanced in my opinion. Her guns are a little bit atrocious right now. They're usable but atrocious compared to all the other operators, and especially comparing her to Ashe. But she does have the one up when it comes to instant impact, and also her secondary gadget, which is kind of like a 2-in-1, her secondary primary gadget, which is her concussion grenades. Those are very unique and pretty useful. But overall, if I'm thinking about an operator that can do what Zofia is supposed to do, I'd rather just bring in Ashe. Next up is Lion, and I feel like ever since Grim got buffed, I feel like Lion is not an operator that I'm going to be bringing a lot of times if I'm trying to scan an area instead of having a universal scan, because those universal scans, even though they can be useful because you're making everybody stand still, Grimbees make people run the hell away, or you have direct pings that's consistent. And Grim just has a better kit overall in my opinion, and way more bees than the 3 Lion scans. So just because of that, I'm putting Lion this low and perfectly balanced in my opinion. Next up is Maestro. Maestro is one of my favorite operators from back in the day, but the thing about Maestro is he has so many things that counteract him now. Like for example, let's say Brava is a huge one. Getting one of your cams hacked is probably one of the worst feelings, and trying to counter that is super annoying because it's a bulletproof camera. So unless you pocket EMPs or something like that, it's just a pain in the ass. And last but not least on this list, we have the defending recruit. In my opinion, the defending recruit is underwhelming but provides a lot of value, but at the cost of bringing primary gadgets, which probably serve better on most maps than bringing, let's say, an extra stack of barbed wire, C4, nitro. So it's a very solo queue focused operator in my opinion. And like I said, I did solo queue to champ on PlayStation 5 last season, using only recruit. I don't have that video out yet because it's very long, but it was a pain in the ass. I don't like the guns that he has primary. Like, it's very hard to frag out with the commando with 1.0 scope compared to facing R4Cs and just other operators that have ACOGs. So you trade off too much utility, in my opinion, on most maps to be bringing an operator like this. Now let's head over to A. Majority of the time, these operators are great. They're good operators. Starting out with Brava. Brava's only downside is the tempo that it takes to use and utilize both cams and hack everything. Or if you're just facing idiots who don't bring utility. Besides that, Brava is fantastic. Hacking utility, the gadgets that she has, like her secondary smokes or even her secondary shotgun, her gun is decent. Like, she is a great pick. Once again, the only problem is, let's say Brava gets her utility hacked by a Mozzie cam, or most of the time what happens is you'll be left in a 2v5 after you hack everything with a minute into the round, because the tempo is played way too fast nowadays in Siege. Next up is Doc. Doc is surely up here because he can literally stem multiple teammates back to 100 HP. And overall, like, he's just so good. Like, there's no downside in bringing a Doc. The only downside is if you're an idiot and you die, like, right away, and then you don't have Doc stems for your teammate. Next up is Pulse. Pulse is one of those operators where you can bring on any site and have effectiveness and impact on the round, because you're literally able to scan where enemies are at. And even though there is a lot of counters like IQ and stuff like that, Pulse is still a great pick. I don't see people use Pulse at his highest potential most of the time because they only use him to get a C4 kill, but he's great. Next up is Fuse. Yes, Fuse is high up on this list. I honestly wish he was in the S tier, but I know too many people would be complaining about Fuse being an S tier and that I'm a gold. Fuse is my favorite operator in Siege in general, and that's only because the amount of utility and the stuff that you can do with his gadget is so cool. Personally, like, I don't see a downside in him, even him being a 3 armor. I just think he has a great kit, great loadout, and can do so much to impact a round. The only downside, once again, is actually getting inside the map most of the time and using his cluster charges. That can be a hassle if you don't have teammates that communicate, but I love him. Next up is Warden. I hate Warden as a player myself because the players that play him are quite dumb. But when you are actually playing in a coordinated environment, Warden is very useful, especially with how overpowered stun grenades are, or what I should say, flashes, not stuns. And then, of course, like, you have smoke grenades, and a lot of the times people do use those quite a bit in higher ranking, but I only see like the 1% of players that are in champ that are like really smart fully use gadgets like smokes and flashes. Next up is Echo. Echo got a huge buff with the drone boosting this season, and I love him. He is such a good freaking operator, especially with his secondary gadgets being a shield. It just complements him so well. Him having an ACOG, of course, and then like his 2 Echo drones, which people use in a very passive way, but playing aggressive with this operator isn't bad at all. So just keep that in mind when you're playing Echo. You can roam, you can do aggressive plays, you can drone outside. Next up is Gridlock. Now, a lot of you guys are going to be like, what the hell is the NFX doing up this high? Gridlock is a very good operator in a lot of ways because Gridlock's utility is super loud, and that can mask the sound of a lot of things like planning, taking specific parts on the map, and it can be a flank watch. But personally, I think Gridlock isn't really a flank watch. Gridlock is best post-plant and to cover areas where you are playing close by. So if they try to flank, you can get the one-up on them if they try to shoot the track stringers and whatnot. Blitz is this high up because of the shield meta that we're kind of in right now. Basically, shields have priority on knifing. So have you ever been in a situation where you knife a shield and it seems like they knifed you after and then they basically still get the down on you? It's because they have the priority. They're just super strong at the moment, and to be honest, facing a blitz is the most irritating thing in the goddamn world. Next up, we have Finka. Finka is the only healer on attack, so just for that, she's going to be this high up on the list, because if we had another healer, I think she would be lower, but she is literally one of a kind on attack. Vigil is also up here just because he has such a strong fragging potential at the moment, and especially the SMG-12 being so overpowered on console, and then mix that with the Boss G becoming super meta. It's a no-brainer, him being this high. Him also being able to not get droned out is super effective because a lot of times you're like, where the hell is this Vigil? And then counteracting the pick on attack with, like, let's say an IQ to try to just counter just Vigil is not always worth it. Now, Dokkaebi, I wanted to put her in S tier, but I think with her recent nerf and just where she's positioned right now and how she plays, I think she's like great. She's a great operator to play, but she's not in the same tier of the operators I have above. And that's just because she is super valuable when she's alive. For example, hacking cams, calling people, but there's a lot to get up to that hacking part. For example, you have to effectively drone somebody out. You have to go up to their phone and actually hack it. So there's a lot of steps involved with Dokkaebi compared to a lot of the other operators that are kind of just seamless, and they are super easy to get the full aspect of their utility. So even though she is super strong, she can be a pain in the ass to get the full value out of. Zero, I'm gonna see some comments I think about Zero as well being this high up. Even though Zero is played very minimal and ranked, I love Zero. He's one of my favorite operators as well because he packs so much utility and at the same time gives you so much lines of sight with cams, and you can just frag out so much with this operator. I love playing him on bank because of the wide open roofs and ceilings, but I know a lot of you guys are going to disagree, but I could not put him any lower, to be honest, because he just packs so much value. Next up, we have Cade, and Cade is the only operator that can deny hatches because, let's say, in an effective manner, because technically you could put a mute or bandit wire on the hatch, but in reality, people are just going to shoot that off. Cade is actually a pain in the ass to deal with, and he changes the way that you play a lot of sites, but it's also, he has so many things that counter his gameplay, like Twitch drones, EMPs, secondary EMPs, all of that. So even though he is super valuable, he's super easy to deal with. Demos is next. Demo has a lot of value as well. It's really dependent on the player. But if we're talking about the operator himself, this operator is very unique, very easy to use. But if you're not getting the frags with the operator, then you basically wasted a majority of your time picking this operator because of that. He's one of those operators where you really need to get frag, or literally was a waste of a pick. Wamai is my next pick. The reason why Wamai isn't like an S tier operator, but he's a great operator, is because a majority of the time when you're picking Wamai, it's because you're doing a more strategic extension or even just hold. And usually, let's say you're playing Cafe, it's behind Bakery Bar, so you can kind of deny all the flashes, air jabs, Ying Candelas, all of that type of stuff. But the majority of the time, a lot of the way that people are playing defense now, you can just bring an Aruni, you can just bring other operators that burn gadgets, and since you can't caulk grenades, it's really not that big of a deal if you get a nade thrown at you, since you can rotate your body quite easily and still survive. But there's a lot of sites where he is super valuable, and I still use him to protect the zombie barriers and stuff like that. But comparing to metas that we've seen in the past where you need Jaeger's ADSs or Wamai's gadgets, it's kind of almost dying out. It's very interesting. Next up is Aruni. Now, I don't really have a big problem with Aruni. I think she's super strong. It's just having so many other counter operators, like for example Brava, is so easy to hack those Aruni gates, and if they hack them, it can really screw over your team. So it's just that is a lot of time I'm not going to want to bring Aruni if they're bringing Brava. A lot of times I'd much rather bring, let's say, a mute, but personally that's just me. I also really suck with DMRs, so I'm good on that, to be honest. And heading over to Buck is up here because his value when it comes to playing vertical and just playing vertical from below, for example, and just his fragging potential. But there are other operators that have breaching charges or even ram gadget or sledge that can do what he does. The only thing that he does very unique is playing vertical from below, quick and efficient, versus let's say an Ashe that does it below. You know, there's quite a bit of a delay. So Buck is super strong, but he isn't the best of the best in my opinion. Next, we have Osa. Osa is very irritating to play against in a post-plant scenario. They get the bomb down, they have Osa shields out. Most of the time, you're going to lose a round because it's super hard to be able to actually defuse when you have somebody sitting behind a shield. But this operator isn't always needed. That's the thing, and that's the reason why I'm putting this operator up here. This operator is not an operator you're going to want to, you know, ban, for example. Like, there's much more valuable bans. But this operator does have a good place in Siege. I do think this is the rework that Blackbeard should have had, but that's whatever. And next we have Valkyrie. Valkyrie is one of the OGs when it comes to cams on defense. She can be always useful, and that's fantastic. Once again, it's just she has so many counter operators, like let's say, you know, Brava, IQ, like, and her gun is the MPX, which is a very underwhelming SMG. So that is that. But Valkyrie is still super strong. Kind of sucks that she can't throw her cams outside though. And then we have Ashe. Ashe is so strong, and mainly because she's a primary counter of Mirror. Mirror can change the way that you play an attacking round, especially on maps like Cafe. So Ashe is just essential, especially for entering the map. She can be so good, and she's so simple to use. Next up is Ram. Ram is a simple operator that provides so much utility and provides so much value. You can literally play vertical play by a click of a button, and you don't even need to like look at the floor while you're doing it. And that's a good thing about Ram. The only thing about Ram is I find that too much vertical play is bad sometimes. Like, you can overexpose your body compared to if you played vertical with Buck or Sledge. But the efficiency that she has is absolutely insane. Heading over to the attacker recruit, he is way better than the defending recruit because he can provide so many primary gadgets that other attackers have in some way. Like, for example, like having a hard breach device, and opening up hard walls is super important in Siege. So just being able to do that yourself, especially with secondary EMPs, or even bringing more burn capability if you need to, if they're bringing Jaeger and Wamai, you know, you can just counteract so many different operators with this operator. And that's what makes him so strong. Next up is Melusi. The only thing that Melusi has not going for her is the counteract picks with Flores, Brava, operators like that. That can definitely screw over your team. She is a chunky girl, but overall, I think she is a fun, effective operator. And if she's on the board, she is so annoying to play against. So if you're not good at counteracting her, then you're basically screwed a lot of the times. But she has so much going for her. But I just don't think she makes that 1% of operators that change the game. Next up is Frost. Frost is so irritating to play against. Super strong trap operator. So you can't really go wrong going Frost, especially because you can make lines of sight with her secondary shotgun, and she has an ACOG. So there's that. And she's just one of those operators that you can place the gadgets down and go run around like an idiot. Ying is another operator that just brings so much utility, but at the same time, it's so easy to screw over your teammates with the Candelas and stuff like that. You can make some really big plays and do some crazy strats with Ying. But once again, to go back to just screwing over your teammate, that is very easy to screw over your teammates and blind them. And heading over to S tier, we have the most valuable operators. Let's start off with Mute and Smoke. Mute and Smoke are two of the best operators that you can bring on defense on any freaking site. And that's literally just because of the value that they provide. They're able to make rotates, Mute stops drone economy, and then Smoke is so good as the round progresses. But you can use smoke canisters anytime that you feel is needed or you feel pressured. And that is super useful, especially if you're stacking up strats with Jaeger or any other operator that needs a recharge. That's what makes Smoke so freaking good, is just the symmetry and how Mute as well works so well with every other defending operator. So there's no chance that you can go wrong going Mute and Smoke. Well, unless you go MP5K on Mute, you're smoking something else. Heading over to Montang. Montang is just like Blitz, so overpowered, except you can't shoot Montang's feet majority of the time. If you're in a 1v1 scenario against a Montang, you basically lost the round. There's no winning that 1v1. You're screwed. Take the L. And then going back to what I was saying about shields, having the knife priority, it's so overpowered. So just for that, we're kind of in a shield meta at the moment. And then next up, we have Capcan. You guys might be surprised Capcan's this high up, but Capcan can literally change around just by the damage done or even the time wasted having to try to clear the utility. Now, don't get me wrong, Capcan has a lot of counters, but the thing is, Capcan has a lot of utility. Besides him having 5 gadgets, him having a C4 just plays so well into the way that ranked is played nowadays. The ranked meta, a lot of people just play stupid. They don't drone enough. They don't communicate enough. So the communication aspect leaves a lot of people with low HPs because they don't communicate where EDDs are. They just don't drone. And then next up we have Goyo. Goyo is my favorite operator. You can use Goyo for denying plants. You can use Goyo to put on barricades. So if, you know, someone's rushing a backside, or if you have a weak end of the map, like Goyo can counteract that. Plus Goyo has an ACOG with proxy alarms, and like you just provide so much value to your team even if you're dead or alive. And you have 4 canisters, which the fire takes so much damage off enemies and has quite a bit of radius. Next up we have Azami. Even though Azami's nerfs, Azami's so strong, man. You can get up in some weird spaces and get some weird angles, and she'll literally change the way you play a site. So even trying to counteract Azami, you're gonna have to pick between getting rid of Azami barriers with, let's say, a Flores, and then getting rid of actual utility like Melusi devices and stuff like that. So defenders just have so much utility to have. So a lot of times people ignore Azami barriers, which is so silly to me. And then next up we have Mirror. Mirror will change every defensive site and change how every attacker attacks that site. Just for that aspect, she has been the strongest defender in Siege majority of since she's been out, because she's so freaking strong. Now it's good Ashe can counteract her, but that's where Wamai and Jaeger comes into play, and them becoming more useful. Habana is up here as the only hard breacher, and that's because she can do more than just hard breach. She can destroy castle barricades. She can destroy a lots of lines of sight. She can do things at range, but also be the only effective long range hatch getter. So she has a lot going for her. And guys, she can even counteract operators like Azami if she needs to with her pellets. So she has a lot of flexibility, and she provides so much value to the team. Next up, you have Legion. Legion is one of those operators that get better over time, just like Smoke as the round progresses. But them making the Legion mines be able to take damage on contact again is super overpowered, and I've seen rounds 1 just based off goo mines, so I can't put Legion any lower. And then last but not least is Flores. The reason why Flores is up here is because the amount of value he brings is endless. For example, he destroys utility, but he also can make vertical. He can open up mini lines of sight. He can counteract so many operators that have shields. And the reason why that's so important is because usually you would have to bring somebody with grenades or, you know, burn all that utility, but instead you can just bring Flores. Instead of having to swing and be at a disadvantage with, like, let's say an Ash Charge or a Zofia, you can now just bring somebody that has a C4 on wheels, and he has multiple of them. By the way, the radius is the same on a Flores drone than as a C4. So guys, this was my tier list. If you guys disagree, agree, let me know down in the comments. Overall, I think this is a solid list for ranked, because I think a lot of these operators I've had experiences with, and I've noticed how they played in ranked. Looking at this list, the only thing like I'm on the fence with is Castle and B, but like the thing is with Castle is he's so site dependent and team dependent that I can't just say he's valuable on every single site, because you can make him valuable on every single site, but that is so much effort compared to other operators that are so easy to be good with. So guys, if you guys enjoyed the video, make sure that you guys like, sub, and comment, and let me know what operators you would swap around. Besides that, guys, have a wonderful day, and thank you.